Picture a major corporate transformation project. The board has approved a precise strategic roadmap, the multi-million-dollar budget is secured, and the global software suite is ready to deploy. Yet, when it comes time to actually flip the switch, projects of this scale routinely collapse. The resources are optimal, but the execution fails completely. The root cause of this collapse is organizational misalignment. It is the friction generated when new technical systems are forced onto existing human behaviors. For decades, executives operated under the misconception that an organization was defined entirely by its formal hierarchy. This diagram represents that mindset, a traditional, top-down organizational chart. Under this logic, fixing problems means simply redrawing lines or shifting personnel between boxes. But this 2D view ignores how work actually flows. In reality, a company functions as a 3D network, where cultural norms carry more weight than static lines. You cannot treat a company like a modular machine where parts are simply swapped out. To successfully execute a complex strategy, leaders must treat the entire organization as a highly interdependent biological system. To accurately map and measure this interdependence, we use a specific diagnostic instrument, the McKinsey 7S framework. The model begins with the hard S elements. These three nodes, strategy, structure, and systems, are the tangible, quantifiable levers of a business. Because they are highly visible and relatively easy to modify on paper, these hard elements are almost always the first targets for executive budget and attention during a corporate pivot. But they are bound to the soft S elements, style, staff, and skills. These represent the embedded human factors that dictate how employees actually behave on a Tuesday morning. At the center of this web sits shared values. This node serves as the anchor point, defining the organizational identity that pulls on every other element. These core beliefs act as the governing physics for the organization, dictating the boundaries for how the other 6 elements operate. The framework functions on a principle of total interdependence. Shifting any single variable creates tension across the entire network, requiring a corresponding recalibration of the other 6 nodes. Consider a practical case: a major regional wholesale supplier in the HoReCa sector, hotels, restaurants, and cafes. The company aimed to secure lucrative supply contracts with 5-star hotel chains. To bid on these contracts, the supplier was required to hold a strict ISO 9001 quality certification. The executive board initiated the transformation by pulling the hard levers. They set a 1-year strategy for compliance, created a new organizational structure for a quality manager, and rolled out a new document control system. They mandated rigid risk assessment forms for the sales force and specific inventory tracking protocols for the warehouse floor. 6 months later, the initiative had stalled. Sales teams refused to complete the paperwork. Warehouse workers ignored the new inventory protocols entirely, leaving stock unorganized. Instead of recognizing the certification as a business upgrade, the workforce viewed the ISO mandate as a burden that interfered with their daily productivity. The board had a clear strategy and functional software. The execution collapsed because these hard structural changes were injected into an environment where the soft elements remained unchanged. By deploying the 7S diagnostic lens, we can pinpoint exactly where the organizational friction occurred. Here, on the framework, we see the first clash. The new ISO systems demanded meticulous traceability. However, the existing corporate shared value was speed over quality, closing the deal as fast as possible. The second clash occurred here. The new strategy required strict compliance, but the traditional executive style was to personally authorize bypassing quality checks to meet monthly sales quotas. The third failure point was here. The new systems required complex risk assessments, but the sales team lacked the specific analytical skills to conduct them. To salvage the project, leadership shifted the narrative to realign the shared values. They communicated that a single failed batch of ingredients could bankrupt the company, making traceability a matter of survival rather than just a policy. Executives shifted their own style, personally enforcing quality protocols, even when it delayed high-value shipments. Simultaneously, the company conducted workshops to build the analytical expertise the sales team needed for risk assessments. Finally, they realigned the staff node by moving quality assurance personnel onto the warehouse floor, to physically shadow and mentor workers until the new tracking behaviors became routine. When human capabilities and leadership mindsets are tuned to match the structural systems, the friction disappears. The theoretical strategy becomes a self-sustaining operational baseline. This dynamic is a universal rule for business strategists. The pre-computation of organizational friction is mandatory before any launch. Before a budget is approved, leaders can use the 7S framework as a diagnostic heads-up display. This can be broken down into a 5-point checklist to scan for misalignment. Question 1. Will the proposed new technical systems violate our existing, deeply held shared values? A culture built on flexible autonomy will naturally resist rigid micromanagement software. Question 2. Does the actual daily style of the executive team contradict the goals of the strategy? You cannot expect an innovation strategy to succeed if leadership punishes every failed experiment. Question 3. Will the current structure obstruct the new strategy? A goal for cross-departmental collaboration is unlikely to be met if your organization is locked into isolated vertical silos. Question 4. Are the baseline skills of the workforce sufficient to operate the new systems being purchased? Buying automated machinery is ineffective without training the staff to maintain and program it. And finally, question 5. What is the impact on staff morale, and what is the plan for those overwhelmed by the change? Only when these elements are in sync can the system function. Mastering the McKinsey 7S framework provides the architectural blueprint for organizational alignment. However, even a perfectly aligned structure on paper must account for human psychology. Employees will still instinctively feel tension when altering decades of routine. Once the friction is mapped and solved structurally, leadership must generate the psychological momentum required to sustain the change. Moving from a structural map to boots-on-the-ground execution requires a different set of tools. Next, we will examine the science of building that momentum through Kotter's 8-step process for change management.